Session 2 is going to be dealing with personal assistants. And let me say that I sincerely believe that personal assistants are extremely critical, especially in our industry. If you want to grow your business in sales, once you have sold up to $4 million or $5 million, at that point, you're going to need some assistance. And it's my opinion and other people's opinions that when you hit that $5 million in production, you probably won't go any further unless you do have assistance. So what I want to talk about is how do we make that decision to hire a personal assistant? Everybody looks at a personal assistant and says, well, wait a minute, how can I afford that person? Well, let me say this. How can you afford not to? I think that's the most important thing. And the number one reason that people don't hire personal assistants, they think they can't afford them. But let me say this, folks, that the day that you hire someone to help you, I promise you, your life will change, and all of a sudden your production will expand itself. It'll more than pay for that personal assistant. And the question is, do you want to hire a licensed assistant or an unlicensed assistant? And I think that when you look at that person that's unlicensed, they can pretty much do anything that a licensed assistant can do, but there's a couple of things that we need to be careful about. Remember, somebody that is not licensed cannot perform any of the services of real estate. And when I'm talking about the services of real estate, that has to do with selling, listing, making appointments for selling and listing, negotiating, and giving personal opinions. So that unlicensed person is going to be restricted in some senses. There are some things, however, that they can do, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in just a minute. The difference between an employee and an independent contractor is important. A lot of your unlicensed assistants are paid a salary, and therefore they're going to be considered to be an employee. And just remember that somebody that's an employee, you have control. You can tell them when to come, you can tell them when to go. But also remember that you're going to be responsible for paying in FICA, unemployment, and other kinds of taxes. Whereas if somebody is an independent contractor, now most of your licensed assistants will probably be maybe a combination of both. But they could certainly be an independent contractor because if they're licensed, that means that they can collect a commission. Remember that as an independent contractor, they're simply just that. You can't tell them when to come and go. They work independently. They're task-oriented. Now, the good news about it is that it's easy to terminate, whereas somebody that's an employee may not necessarily be that easy to terminate. Also, as an independent contractor, we don't have to worry about their income tax, their FICA and unemployment and all the other stuff that goes with it. That's something that they have to do themselves. IRS rules are real clear on that. Anytime that we tell somebody what to do, when to be and how to do these things, we have to be careful about that, especially telling them when to be here, when they can come, when they can go, breaks and things of that nature. That might imply that they may be an employee. Let's talk about compensation, because I think at this point when we've got a personal assistant, you've got to understand that compensation. I've already mentioned a little bit about it. But the deal is this: if that person is on a salary or on an hourly wage, a sales associate or anybody can pay that assistant. But the moment that person has a license and the moment that they make a sale or involved in a transaction, or that you're going to pay them a percentage of a transaction, they've got to have a real estate license. And that compensation, if they have a real estate license, it has to be placed with a broker. And that means only the broker can compensate them for a commission or being paid on a per transaction basis. Finding the right assistant, let me tell you, it's not as easy as you think, but it's not as difficult either. And I think there's got to be a series of things that we have to look at. Do they have the same goals? What are their responsibilities? All these things that you have to talk about when you do your interviews. And let me suggest something also, that when you're running an ad and you want to interview a personal assistant, run an ad in the paper or wherever it might be, but do not put your telephone number in. What you want to do up front is that you want to make them write in and send you in a resume, because you want to see how well they write up front. The second thing that you want to do, once you've reviewed their resume and that you can see that they can communicate in writing, you want to send them a letter or an email back and say, I'd like to set up a telephone conference with you. I'd like to talk to you. And what you're trying to do at this point is you're trying to find out what kind of telephone etiquette they have. How well do they sound on the telephone? If you're satisfied with that, and by the way, understand that most of your customers and clients, first contact is the telephone. So you want to make sure that they come across well on the telephone. Once that occurs and you feel comfortable, then ask them in. Now let's have a sit down face to face, because you want to look at them and make sure that they're dressed appropriately, that they have the right appearance, because remember, when somebody comes in the office, that first appearance is critical and it's everlasting. Some of the questions that you might want to ask them: do you have a real estate background? What you need to stay away from are personal questions. Marital status, kids, things of that nature. Also, you need to be very careful about asking people if they can work Saturdays and Sundays, because that may infringe into religious beliefs, and we want to stay away from that as well. I've listed you a number of questions that you can ask on page 2-8. Take a look at those if you're going to interview somebody, and just keep all these in mind. You're trying to find that person that's going to be the best fit for you. And do yourself a favor. Don't hire the first person that walks through the door. There are a lot of prospects out there, a lot of individuals that will fit your needs. Working with the personal assistant, I think training is going to be very important. Obviously, training in your system. And you just need to take the time. You need to make sure that they have good telephone etiquette. You need to make sure that they are comfortable when greeting people. I'll tell you what I like to do on interviews. I like to push the hot button and see if I can make them mad, because I want to see what their response is. I want to see, because buyers and sellers out there sometimes say things that pushes the button, and I want to know first. I want to know that if I can push a button and they don't come unglued or become rattled, that means they'll do okay with the customer as well. Let's talk about some of the things that an unlicensed assistant can do. Actually, all the assistants, they can actually hand out keys. They can give information and facts. I'll tell you one of the big things that they can do. They can set open houses for you. I wouldn't recommend it, especially an unlicensed assistant, because if you have an open house and if somebody wants to get involved with discussing the property, all of a sudden they're very restricted. The big thing that people ask me: can a personal assistant that's unlicensed do a CMA, a competitive market analysis? They can absolutely do a CMA. What they can't do is present it and explain it. That's giving opinions, but they can certainly prepare, because that's informational only. And just remember that if that person is licensed, they're just like you. They are able to perform the services of real estate. I'll tell you what a lot of agents do, and just so that you understand, buyers will oftentimes, more times than not, absorb 3 times more of your time than a seller will. And a lot of very successful agents had rather be the listing agent working with sellers and turning over buyers to their assistants. That means that those buyer agents that are assistants also have to be licensed as well. And that's all I have for the personal assistant chapter. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to review some of the important issues with you that may be on your examination, those areas of critical concern. Cost is the #1 reason agents are reluctant in hiring an assistant. Unlicensed assistants cannot perform any service of real estate. Independent contractors handle paying their own income taxes. Employees can be controlled, whereas independent contractors can't be. An unlicensed assistant cannot be paid on a real estate transaction basis. Do not discuss working on Saturdays and Sundays during any kind of interview. Unlicensed assistants can prepare CMAs, however, they cannot present those CMAs to customers or clients. And that's all we have for this session on personal assistants.